ahead and start? What do you think?
Yes, I think we should get going. The councillor is on. My name is Carol Bracapay. I'm co-chair with Laura of the OSCA Planning and Zoning Committee. I want to welcome you all to the meeting. Before we start, I'm going to turn this over to my husband, who is Algonquin from Kitigamzi First Nation, who's going to say a few words at the beginning of our meeting.
Kway. Good to be here with all of you in your deliberations. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Simon Bracapay. I'm Carol's husband. And I would just like to say that you're on Algonquin territory. The land, they say unceded territory, which means there's never been a claim or treaty for Algonquin or Anishinaabe territory. And so it's been in the hands of Algonquins for thousands of years. And I like the subtitle for this session, What Will It Mean for Old Ottawa South over the next 25 years? So congratulations to you for thinking well into the future. We have one idea, it's called 7 generations thinking. And most Indigenous people have similar ideas that we think for and make decisions as if we have in mind the 7 generations to come. So I think you're certainly on the right track. Good luck with your discussions and your discussions with the city. Miigwech. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I'd just like to once again welcome everybody and acknowledge we have our councillor online. I saw him make a comment earlier. So Laura will start with the presentation, and we have members of the community of Ottawa South, but community members from other parts of Capital Ward and other parts of the city who are interested in the impact of the official plan and what it will mean to the community. The presentation today is specifically about Old Ottawa South, but it does have implications for other parts of the city as well. So I'll turn this over to Laura to start the presentation.
Thank you, Carol. Sean, did you want to say a few words before we begin into the actual presentation?
No, Laura, just a big thank you for holding this and looking forward to working with everyone as we craft motions for the October 14th Planning Committee meeting. So very much appreciate you holding this session.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sean. I wanted to say thank you to you and to your office for helping us out on all of this. To Richard, our association president, who's always wonderful and very helpful. He'll say a few words at the end of our presentation. To Luke, who's from Ottawa, Old Ottawa South staff, who's running the presentation for us today and taking time out from his evening to do so. To Matt from Old Ottawa South, who worked hard as well to get this going. And to Winnie, who's our volunteer board member who has been involved in helping get this through. And certainly to all of you for being here and joining us. Thank you. We ask that if you have questions that you hold them to the end, and then we can all discuss together the questions back and forth. You can just raise your hand at the in the chat, and then as we'll be going slide by slide, if you notice that you have a question on a particular slide, just note the number of the slide, and the number of the slide will be on the top right of each slide. Basically, our presentation is, OSCA, and it's about what the new official plan is going to what the new official plan is going to mean for us over the next 25 years. Luke, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so first we'd like to talk about positive moves that this new official plan will have for our city as a whole, and there are positive impacts. There will be some forthcoming climate change mitigation standards for new developments, and that will always be helpful because, you know, there is so much that we are going to be facing in terms of climate change, not only over the next 25 years, you know, God knows, a large impact for a long time to come, but at least these climate change mitigation standards for new developments will help ameliorate that, at least when it comes to land use planning for our city. We commend the city's policy moves for preserving agricultural and environmental land in rural areas. Again, that's something that'll be very positive for all of us. We commend the plan's policies towards developing all new or many new future communities as 15-minute neighborhoods. 15-minute neighborhoods are neighborhoods such as ours in the Glebe and Old Ottawa East and a few others in Ottawa, where you can meet all of your needs within a 15-minute walk. So, you know, not all of your needs, but your major needs, you know, your ability to get to a grocery, to get to a coffee shop, to get to a restaurant, hopefully a library, you know, the things, the basic necessities within 15 minutes. Every neighborhood could use a bit more of something, you know, extra clinics, extra dental clinics. But for the most part, the idea is that, you know, we would all be able to access basic needs within a 15-minute walk. The city is also encouraging active transportation, that's walking, cycling, and transit. And that's always, you know, something that's very helpful towards helping to ameliorate some of these conditions that occur when you have a city that is basically, you know, run by the automobile. And, you know, we've seen over the last few decades that doesn't always work out well. The city is also encouraging higher densities around transit stations. In and of itself, that is something that helps to encourage people who live in those areas to use that active transportation, so along LRT stations. And that also will be helpful. And then the push for greater housing choices, which is important in all neighborhoods. Even in Old Ottawa South, we could probably use some more rental apartment buildings and also greater options for seniors. So that's something that's important. Thank you. Next slide, please, Luke. So here are some changes from the last draft that are very important positive moves. In the last draft, Old Ottawa South and many other inner urban neighborhoods would have been covered under something called a transforming overlay. It would have meant much greater densities that were to occur quite quickly throughout our neighborhoods, and would have spelled, you know, very, very different visions for communities than what we have now. So we are extremely happy that, you know, all of your letters, all of the input of all of the residents from Old Ottawa South and so many other neighborhoods have meant that the transforming overlay is now no more. And there will be no parts of the city under this transforming overlay. They have also, the density levels that the transforming overlay offered to areas like Old Ottawa South have been lowered. And in the first draft, those increased density levels were thresholds. So we had to meet them, and you had to meet them, you know, per hectare on a per lot basis, which meant a heck of a lot of intensification. Those are now targets, and they're on the ward level, as opposed to, or on a transect level, sorry, as opposed to being on a per lot level. So that's also a very positive move. And the density increases that are still being suggested are now being spread out more evenly between inner neighborhoods and outer urban neighborhoods. And that will help to densify all of our city in a more appropriate manner. Next slide, please, Luke. Thank you. So now we get to the nitty gritty and down to what are positive policy moves for Old Ottawa South. This is something that was included in the first draft, and we're happy to see that it remains. There will be a new special district designation along the canal, basically from the Laurier Avenue Bridge all the way down to Hartwell Locks. This will encourage compatibility of development with the existing character of the ribbon that is there. And it's for the first row of houses on either side along the canal. And so the policies there are to have a secondary plan study done to guide development and to look for ways to enhance the heritage protections that already exist. That doesn't mean that there will be no changes to any houses lining the canal. What it does mean is that a study will be done to see what may be done to enhance the protections that are already there and to ensure that new development, any new development, conforms to the character of the existing ribbon of homes along the canal. Thank you. Next slide, please, Luke. Okay, and this is slide number 5, in case there are any questions on this slide later. And it refers to the quick highlights for our neighborhood. As mentioned earlier, we are a 15-minute neighborhood. And you know, that means certain things. As explained earlier, it means that within a 15-minute walk, most of us are able to find basic things we need. So we're able to find sliced bread. You know, we have Cedars on one end. You can walk a little further and get to Billings. You can get to Whole Foods on this side. We're lucky. We have a library. We have a community center. We have the fire hall. We have a school in our neighborhood. Many of our basic needs can be met. We have a pharmacy. You know, many of our basic needs can be met within a 15-minute walk. We are part of the inner urban transect. And I think I explained this in the first presentation, and I'm sorry for those of you who are sitting through this twice, but it's important that we all sort of be on the same page. The inner urban transect was much larger in the first draft, and the city has condensed that somewhat because there were neighborhoods that were within the inner urban transect who felt that they belonged in the outer urban transect. And the city was able to switch some of those out of the inner urban transect, and of course be more onerous infill policies for the inner urban transect. So the city decided that the demarcation line would be how neighborhoods that are mostly pre-war, pre-Second World War construction versus neighborhoods that are mostly post-Second World War construction. Let's see, for example, Alta Vista was part of the inner urban transect in the first draft. They are now part of the outer urban transect. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the densities in that outer urban transect have now been increased from what they were in the first draft. And so as part of the inner urban transect, the concentric ring that lives around downtown, we can expect to see increased neighborhood densities over the long term, so over the life of the plan, which is 25 years. We can also expect to see low-rise apartments that are 3 to 16 units and that contain, and other types of buildings that contain 3 to 4 larger flats that are called 613 flats. And they will be, those will happen all over the neighborhood in any area that's designated neighborhood. So where you want to have a property now that may have one house on it, and you know, currently you could see a semi developed on that land, or maybe even a triplex if it's big enough. We can now look to forms that we don't know what they are yet exactly. We only know that they're bigger and that they can contain 3 to 4 larger flats on one lot. The zoning that will be coming in future. So this is the official plan. It's not about, so the official plan is the big umbrella. The zoning bylaw defines the nitty gritty. They'll start changing the zoning bylaw starting towards the latter part of this year and then through the next 3 or 4 years. And we will all need just to stay quite aware, because the zoning bylaw will go street by street. And you know, the main changes that are going to be spelled out for every street and every property in our neighborhood will happen through the zoning bylaw. What this official plan does is set on a general scale what permissions, general permissions, can be allowed via the zoning. So if there's something that the official plan allows, unless there's a secondary plan, the zoning bylaw can't come in and say, oh no, you know, we're not going to allow this here, because a developer would come back and say, but wait a minute, the official plan gave me permission to do this. You can't limit, you know, my possibilities now, and they would be correct. Now, unfortunately, even with the secondary plans, as we've seen recently for the 2 developments there at the foot of Billings Bridge, even a secondary plan for an area of a neighborhood that has been worked out, unfortunately, is not a guarantee of anything. But anyway, there we are. So back to what I was saying. The future zoning will regulate building form, not unit type. And what that means is that the city, in its future zoning bylaw, will regulate the size of the box that can exist on a particular property. What goes into that box, whether it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 8 units, or maybe not 8 units, but, you know, 4, 6, whatever, will be determined by what can possibly function there and still meet building code and fire code and all of those other strictures. Rather than, so the city will mostly regulate the form, the outside shape of the box and how it fits into a street, as opposed to regulating whether 1 home, 2 homes, 3 homes, or 6 homes can exist within that form. Now, in this draft, there's something new. It's called an evolving overlay. Now, the last draft used to have an evolving overlay. This has the same name, but is not the same thing as the evolving overlay in the last draft. In this evolving overlay, it means that in areas where we have main streets, so Bank and Bronson, and somebody brought to my attention this afternoon, near an area of Main Street that is not in our neighborhood, but the evolving area behind it touches onto our neighborhood. Those areas will have an evolving overlay, and the evolving overlay means that there will be denser forms, apartment buildings, and lot consolidations there may be more likely. Next slide, please, Luke. So slide number 6. This is where the highlights of the evolving overlay, and these can be found in section 5.6.1.1 of the official plan. So the official plan is available on the Engage Ottawa website, and anyone can go and look up these actual policies so that you can read what they say and see how they will affect your property, your neighborhood, your city. So in areas where this evolving overlay applies, it says that the zoning bylaw, the future zoning bylaw, will provide development standards that are consistent with the planned characteristics of the overlay area. So to break this down, what does that mean? It means that unlike areas, say like a special district, where the zoning bylaw or the studies that they plan to do are so that new development matches the characteristics of the existing area. Here they say that in the evolving overlay, the future zoning bylaw will provide development standards that are consistent with the planned characteristics. So what new developments will look like and have the character of what the city wants to be there, as opposed to what is there now. So if you have a street that, has, porches and a certain setback and a certain look and feel, that's not necessarily what's going to happen in an evolving overlay. In the evolving overlay, the city wants to see, strictly urban forms. It wants to see low-rise apartment buildings. So over time, anything in an evolving overlay will change to the characteristics that the city wants to see there. In an evolving overlay, it also says that the zoning bylaw will include minimum density targets as identified in Table 3A, and permissions to meet or exceed the density targets of Table 3B. So if a development comes up that presents to the city a greater density than what the tables provide, the city will be all in, as long as it meets, the normal strictures of building code and other things that have to apply. It also says that the city will be supportive of applications for low-rise, that's up to 4 stories, that seek to move beyond the development standards of the underlying zone. So what does that mean? So the zoning bylaw, as we explained, gives you the nitty gritty. The nitty gritty is supposed to change over the next 2 or 3 years. And of course, you know, it's early days, so the city may want to move beyond what those zoning bylaws say now within an evolving overlay. But the plan, the official plan, has a life of 25 years. And there's no limit to the sentence that says, or the policy that says, that the city will be supportive of applications that seek to move beyond the development standards of the underlying zone. So even if the underlying zone changes to something, you know, that permits greater density in, say, for example, 10 years, the way the policy is written now, the city will still be supportive of developments that seek to move beyond that new zoning designation, because this policy in the official plan doesn't give an end date. So it's not saying we'll be supportive of policies for, you know, that go beyond the zoning that will exist until 2024, and then, you know, this policy is no longer valid. No, this policy will be valid as it is written now for 25 years, and then that may be an issue. And lastly, the city may support amendments to the future zoning bylaw for intensification that it proposes non-residential uses. So if you live in one of those evolving overlays, which, you know, the evolving overlay that affects us on behind Main Street goes to that western portion of Avenue Road that aligns with Main Street, that's parallel to Main Street. So on that street, the city may support amendments to the zoning bylaw for intensification that proposes non-residential uses. So you can see something there that isn't houses. And the same thing for on Bank Street all the way to Grosvenor on the west side, Bank Street all the way to almost Bellwood on the east side, on Bronson almost all the way to Carlisle. So these future zoning bylaw may see the city supporting amendments to that bylaw for intensification for non-residential uses within those evolving overlays. And finally, where will that evolving overlay apply? We just went over that. So it went in the Main Streets at Bank and Bronson to a depth of 150 meters on either side. So that's, you know, Grosvenor, Bellwood off Bank Street, off Main to that section of Avenue Road, to the west side of Avenue Road, and on Bronson almost to Carlisle. And then on the minor corridor, which is Sunnyside, between Bank and Bronson, so not the part between Bank, you know, going all the way east on Sunnyside, but on Sunnyside between Bank and Bronson. The map shows a depth of to the end of the lot line on Sunnyside for properties facing Sunnyside on Sunnyside Avenue, and then to Woodbine on the north of Sunnyside. So that was slide number 6 on the evolving overlay. Next slide, please, Luke. Thank you. So this slide basically shows, it's a blow up of the city map that shows where these evolving overlay apply. And you can see the evolving overlay are the, basically the light purple with the sort of chunky rectangular bits. And you can see where it goes on either side of Bank, where it applies to us on Bronson, hitting almost Carlisle. And then that little sliver at the end there on Main Street, because Old Ottawa South ends at Avenue Road. But where Avenue Road sort of angles to match the angle on Main Street as it joins Smythe, you can see that bit on Avenue Road on the west side that would be affected by the evolving overlay. So that is slide number 7. Next slide, please. Thank you, Luke. So highlights by street type. So we've got Main Street, and it will have the evolving overlay behind it. On the street itself, on lots that face the street, we can have mixed use buildings up to 9 stories as of right. And as of right means that, no one has to ask for an exception. So they don't need to go to planning committee. They don't need to ask for an amendment to put a building up that goes up to 9 stories, as long as the building fits on the site. And we'll get into that in a little bit later. And then new to this draft, Main Street. So in the last draft, Bronson was not a main street. It's a main street now. And behind that, on the east side, which is the side that affects Old Ottawa South, it will have an evolving overlay, as we said, almost up to Carlisle. And although mixed-use 9-story buildings will be available on Bronson as of right, we don't have any lots on private property that face or that abut Bronson, where the Brewer Arena is. That whole area that abuts Bronson, and it's all city property, and the city could do as it wishes on its own property, obviously. But we have that NCC strip between, or what I believe is an NCC strip between Bronson and is it Carlton Terrace, Carlton Woods, along there. So basically, we will have on the area of Bronson, we will have an evolving overlay in those streets on Old Ottawa South facing Bronson. Next is the minor corridor, and that's between Sunnyside and Bronson. And it too will have an evolving overlay. On it, residential buildings will be allowed that are between 2 and 6 stories, and that depends on the lot size. And on minor corridors, locally oriented businesses will be possible on the ground floor with residential building units above. The next item is collector streets. And, staff let me know, thankfully, that the collector streets do not have any implications within the official plan. So even though that's something that has to do with the transportation master plan, in terms of land use planning, there is no difference between a collector street and streets with a neighborhood designation. So we'll go on to neighborhood designation. And on neighborhood designation streets, which is everything from, Willard, Fairbairn, Belmont, Fentimore, Ossington, Hopewell, Aylmer, Carlisle, you name it, all of our streets. Those are designated neighborhood. And within those, residential buildings, generally up to 3 stories, but with the possibility of 4 stories will be allowed. We can have single families, semis, triplex, and the small apartment 613 flats. And in some areas, leisure, entertainment, and other small scale commercial uses will be allowed. What will be allowed where is not defined, but the fact that the official plan says it means that, it can be argued for on any particular development. So those are small scale commercial enterprises. Next slide, please, Luke. So for those of you who saw our last presentation or have seen the OSCA that contained this a few months back, on the left, you can see potentially what a 9-story building would look like on Bank. So we can erase Bronson from there, as we don't have any Main Street facing properties onto Bronson. But on Bank, you can see that 9 stories are possible. The dark line towards the bottom is the 6-story building height limit. After 6 stories, you must step your building back a bit. So you can see the dashed lines above, and those dashed lines represent what 9 stories would be, taking into account the fact that the top 3 stories would be set back. Then on the minor corridor sunny side, that is on the right-hand side, and that is my error. It should say 2 to 6 stories above there. So you can have easily a 4-story building there. And again, those are shown with the dark line. And then depending on whether or not you've assembled enough lots to have the proper transitions in height, etc., you can go up to 6 stories. And again, you can have locally oriented businesses on the ground floor and residential above. Next slide, please. So these are, thank you, Luke, the height limiting factors. So if that's because the possible 9 stories and the possible 6 stories is not to say that every lot can contain a 6-story or a 9-story building. There are limitations to that. So the lot depth is a limitation. You have to combine enough lots to make it worth it to try to fit a 6 or 9-story building on there. Because, you know, a 9-story pencil with no access, you know, after you go over 12 residential units, you do have to provide some kind of parking. Not much in the inner urban transit, but some. And you have to make, you know, your exit stairs and your elevators and all of that work. And the fire code requirements to work. And in order to do that, you need space. You need space to make that happen and to make it economically viable to do so. So lot depth is a limiting factor on main streets and in the minor corridors. And because on top of that, you have to sort of diminish your height as you meet the residential buildings behind you. So there are limitations. That's not to say that it can't happen. As we know, you know, land consolidations happen all the time, and lot assemblies happen all the time. The next limitation is right-of-way width, and I will use Sunnyside as an example here. So if Sunnyside is 17.5 meters wide, which is a number we got from staff, that means that there's a 1-to-1 height ratio. So a building could not be higher than the width of the street plus the right-of-way. So no building could be higher than 17.5 meters on Sunnyside, maximum. What does 17.5 meters work out to? Well, at a 1.1 ratio, that's a 17.5 meter height, and at 2.9 meters per floor, you could work out a 6-story residential building. If you were doing a building that has offices or commercial on the ground floor, and those we normally allow higher height for those, you would probably be looking at a taller commercial ground floor, and then 4 stories of residential above, 4 or 5 stories. But again, the nitty-gritty of all this will be worked out when we do the zoning bylaw changes. For now, the official plan gives you the overall permissions. So the official plan says overall to a maximum of 6 stories. We have to see if that becomes viable when the zoning bylaw changes begin to be proposed. So stay aware, stay awake for those. We'll be working on those as they come along. Shadowing impacts. So there's a limit to how much shadowing you can do on your neighbor's properties. That's not to say that you can't have your shadows impacting neighbors. Shadows from one building impact somebody else's property all the time. What they can't have is undue impacts. So, you know, you can't deny somebody light and air and everything else, 300 days out of the year. Those things are argued on a case-by-case basis and lead to a lot of discussions at the tribunals. And you also have to have transitions to abutting lots. As I said, you can't, back your 6-story or 9-story building straight onto somebody's backyard. There have to be height transitions towards the back. There are also practical and technical considerations that we've talked about: fire code, building code, accessibility, and all of that. And we talked about the right-of-way width ratios and how those can't be exceeded. Thank you. Next slide, please, Luke. So building heights on neighborhood streets. As of right, people will be allowed up to 3 stories, 3 full stories. And that's, again, is the solid line that's shown. And then 4 stories will be possible, and that's the dashed line above. And again, single family, semis, triplexes, small apartments, 613 flats will be allowed within the neighborhood designation. And again, the future zoning bylaws may allow some non-residential uses on what are now called neighborhood streets. So the current zoning allows for 2 or 3 stories, depending on where you live, which is generally 8.5 meters in R1 and R2 zones, and 10 meters in R3 zones that have a flat roof, and 11 meters if the roof on your home or the development is pitched. So we'd be going from basically 2 to 3 stories to 3 to 4 stories as of right for the 3 stories. And that's everywhere. So even areas, you know, along, say, Southern and Avenue, and those areas that tend to have less dense development than some of the other areas of our neighborhood, the neighborhood designation is the same everywhere. So, but generally speaking, as far as the official plan is concerned, you know, what's good for Bristol and Fentimore and what's good for Hopewell and Ossington is good for Southern and Avenue. And, you know, I think that one of the things that makes our neighborhood a great 15-minute neighborhood is the variety, that you have housing choices, that the look and feel of Fentimore and Bristol is different than, say, Southern, or say the Canal, you know, or along Harvard. Everything has, there's variety, there are things to choose from. And I think that that's what makes it special. And I think that that's something that, you know, an issue that maybe we should strive, particularly, you know, when the zoning comes in, to maintain that variety, which makes it such a great neighborhood. Next slide, please, Luke. So these are potential impacts on our neighborhood designated streets and also in the evolving overlay. The city is saying that, and within the official plan is saying that they propose to exempt certain applications or reduce the needs for, or reduce the requirements of, site plan control for low-rise buildings that meet their intensification objectives. Most of the infill is to be through low-rise buildings. So we would be exempting most of the future buildings from site plan control. Now, site plan control controls garbage, trees, accessibility, drainage, so many things that, you know, we know from developments that have happened to date that, you know, site plan control is important because it does control. It's also a mechanism that holds back money. And whenever a development happens, that money isn't returned, that deposit is not returned to the developer until the requirements of site plan control have been met. And they wait a year of growing season to make sure that, you know, the lawn is in, the tree is in, that the garbage is where it's supposed to be, all of those sorts of things. If you eliminate or exempt applications that are going to be the majority of the applications in our neighborhood from site plan control, well, then that control isn't there. And I think site plan control is something that, you know, tends to be important because it holds people's feet to the fire. And it helps to make sure, to the greatest possible degree, that, you know, people meet their obligations. And so another potential impact is that the official plan says that future zoning bylaw may allow some non-residential uses in the neighborhood interior. So, you know, that could happen on any street. You could have something in the middle of Hopewell, Ossington, Fentimore, Willard, Fairbairn, you know, you name it. It also says, and they don't define what the limits are. The limits, you know, hopefully will come with the zoning bylaw. But again, the overarching umbrella of the official plan is granting these permissions generally. It also says that lower density typologies, such as new singles and semis, may be prohibited in certain areas. So that gets a little cryptic. Where would those areas be? I would hazard the guess that if you were to do that, it would probably be in areas where there is an evolving overlay, because they are looking for denser, larger developments within the evolving overlays. It's quite possible that if lower density typologies were to be disallowed, it would probably be within those evolving overlays. but again, not clearly defined. Also, and this is something that I think, the Federation of Citizens Association, Ecology Ottawa, Green Space Alliance, and any number of other cafes and other groups in the city of Ottawa are addressing, is that there is a citywide target of 40% for tree canopy coverage, but there are no tree canopy targets by neighborhood. And this is a problem. Also, maintaining the existing tree canopy is a huge issue. On 2 sites, we lost 11 mature trees in Old Ottawa South in July. And just last week, we lost 5 trees off another site. So, if we keep losing the tree canopy at this rate, it's difficult to say how we're going to maintain a tree canopy cover if there are no neighborhood targets. And another thing that's going to threaten mature trees and space for new trees is that higher lot coverages, which is what is being proposed for denser farms. If the buildings are taking over most of the lot, it's pretty hard to get trees in there. And if you're taking down the existing trees and then substituted one mature tree for all of the trees that were there before, well, that's not really going to help us maintain our tree coverage. So site plan control requires space for trees, but if site plan controls are reduced or exempted for low-rise housing, that's not going to spell a whole lot of new trees for us. And last but not least, the policies for streets that are designated neighborhood will change the rhythm and cadence of Old Ottawa South's residential streets. So if new infill development is being encouraged where the setbacks are reduced with greater lot coverages and with greater heights on any given street, that spells a rhythm and a cadence to that street that's different from what's there now. The mature neighborhood overlay that exists in the zoning bylaw now helps to address that and to ameliorate that situation at least a little bit. But unfortunately, if the official plan changes that, and the plan is that neighborhoods should have the desired character as opposed to the existing character, then we lose that. And again, that speaks to what is unique about our neighborhood, that different streets have different rhythms and different cadences. And if the permissions are the same in all of the neighborhood designated streets, that speaks that doesn't speak to what Old Ottawa South is. Next slide, please. Thank you, Luke. So what happens next? Next is that all of our comments, yours and mine, and everybody else who wishes to write to the city, should be in before the Planning Committee and Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee joint session, which is occurring on October 14th, I believe. So we should get our written comments in before then. And comments to City Council, which will be the final approval body for that plan from a municipal point of view, have to be in by October 27th. The Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, they have to approve the plan, and they will do so later on this year. Once the plan comes into effect, there are no appeals allowed. So it's important that we all get our comments in to the city and let them know, if we have concerns. We may not have any, or you as an individual may or may not have any concerns or any issues, or there may be things that you think are wonderful. And also, please let the city know that. We have to say that, we should say in our letters what they've done well as what we don't agree with. So the fact that the transforming overlay is gone is a huge load off our shoulders. The fact that the density thresholds are now targets and that they're lower is also another huge benefit to our community. So we should commend where there are things that are commendable, and where we still have issues or concerns, we should address those as well in our letters. And the city amends the zoning bylaws, I think, as we mentioned before, starting later on this year, and then in the next 3 or 4 years beyond that. Next slide, please, Luke. And last but not least, the comments on the plan are due by October 13th, 2021. And please visit the city's website, engageottawa.ca, the new official plan, if you want to read the policies and sections of the new official plan yourself. And there's the city will be holding an open house on the 29th, so day after tomorrow. It would be good to attend that. I don't know what the format is for that, and if questions will be entertained. But anyway, on the 29th, there is a city open house meeting. And then most importantly, if you are sending comments, both kudos and concerns, please send those directly to the Planning Committee, care of Melanie Dufresne at ottawa.ca, and to the city clerk, Rick O'Connor. If you send comments to the city clerk, it is his job to make sure that all of the councillors and the mayors are copied in on your correspondence. So he's an important one. And then to city planning staff themselves at newop@ottawa.ca. It said that, you know, up until the moment when council approves this is still an open draft. So I think that letting people know where our concerns are and making sure that, you know, we continue to stay engaged to the end of this process, and, you know, especially through the street by street zoning bylaw changes that are going to be occurring. Yeah, this is us. This is where we live. This is our neighborhood. We must continue to stay engaged all the way through. If we possibly can. I know that sometimes it gets repetitive and irritating and annoying. God knows it does for me as well. But, you know, in the end, we have to do our part to do what's best as each and every one of us sees it. And I'm sure we all see it differently for our neighborhood. So thank you so much for listening to the presentation. And please, if there are any questions, just raise your hands in the chat. And I think Luke will let people in one by one. And I'll do my very best to try to answer it. And if I don't know, I'll just say, you know, I don't know. And perhaps in the next couple of weeks, we can all try to find out together. Thank you.
So yeah, I think I've unmuted. Thank you, Laura, for the presentation. I think we all learned the main points that affect Old Ottawa South. I'm actually going to just talk a little bit, Laura. If you could have a quick look at the chat section to see some of the questions that people have put in the chat section in response to the one gentleman who talked about the OP being part of the election, an election issue next year. As Laura highlighted, while the Federation of Citizens Associations, the FCA, pushed a lot to try and get the official plan vote deferred until after the election, they were not successful. Many people did ask the city, why are you pushing this through during COVID when we're not sure about you know, how the demographic patterns and, you know, where people want to live in the city until the pandemic is over, and it might take a few years for this to settle down. We won't know, but the city is pushing through with the official plan vote in October, and this is the last chance to influence any of the sections that you disagree with or support in between now and the timeline that Laura has mentioned. It is unfortunate that this is not going to be, it won't be an election issue next year. I think we can make a lot of noise about it, but we cannot change the fundamentals that are in this official plan. So, and a couple of other things. Perhaps, Laura, you could elaborate.
Sure. So I'm looking through the chat now, and I'll just start with the ones that are above.
Okay.
So how many 613s would be acceptable? As many as they can fit in, basically. Any property that comes up for sale that's big enough for a 613 flat, if the developer chooses to do so, then you know, it's likely the city will support that application. Unless the zoning bylaw eventually says something different, But I think that that is the purpose of the 613 plats, is to transition neighborhoods to greater densities. So slide 5, will bunk houses then be allowed? Well, a bunk house is not an official plan term. We know in our neighborhood what we call bunk houses, but basically they are not regulating the type of housing. So rooming houses will be allowed everywhere in every neighborhood. So that would be basically places that rent rooms as opposed to units. And we try not to regulate what kinds of people live in places. And so land use planning tries not to do that. And I agree with that. But right now, rooming houses are limited to certain areas within the city. That will no longer be the case. They'll be allowed everywhere. So the next one was, so will commercial buildings be allowed on residential streets near more main streets? So in the evolving overlay, so somebody else wrote in and said, 9-story buildings behind Bank Street. No, the 9 stories is limited to lots that face Bank Street. In the evolving overlay, it will be low rise. So 4 stories on all evolving overlays, but they will allow non-residential buildings in that area that are no more than 4 stories high. So it could be an office building or a WeWork place or something like that, non-residential, in areas that have an evolving overlay. Or more likely, it could be something that has offices or commercial on the ground floor and 3 stories of residential above. And what else is on this? The evolving overlay could be modified by having periodic policy reviews. Yes, it could. An official plan is reviewed. When it's a new official plan, as this one is, it does not get reviewed for 10 years, but thereafter it gets reviewed every 5 years. So that's good to know. Yes, it would be wonderful if we would support democracy. Unfortunately, municipalities are creatures of the province. And yeah, I'm not sure what we can do in that, other than, as Carol said, democracy means that we get to vote every time there's a municipal election. So as an example, encouraging 9-story buildings 150 meters west of Bank Street. No. So those would not be 9-story buildings. Those would be at maximum 4-story residential, and in some cases, non-residential buildings. Let's see. I could be mistaken, but page 128, interurban transit, Main Street corridors indicates maximum 4 stories dependent on transition and road width. Can you speak to this? So that is at hubs and corridors. Our nearest hub is Billings. So the entire area of Billings, all the way down to the RA Center. If you can take a look on, it's one of the B schedules in the official plan. I think it's Schedule B2, if I recall correctly. And you can look there and you can see it's a darker purple, and that's a hub. And in hubs, they will encourage high-rise buildings closer to a greater, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. So in areas that have, greater transit capacity, where they have LRT stations and, big bus interchanges like we do at Billings, those are be considered hubs. And in those hubs, 40 stories and, likely more will be considered in those areas. So we are not in a hub in Old Ottawa South. We have the Rideau River between us and the hub. And so it is not likely that we will get 40 stories, at least not anytime in the near future, and not unless somebody consolidates an awful lot of land. So yes, we are not a hub. There's no area within Old Ottawa South that is a hub. Next, can somebody have a cannabis store in a neighborhood street? Well, I'm sure there will be a test case for this, Anna, as somewhere along the road, the official plan does not speak to what may or may not be allowed on a neighborhood street. It does say that they should be locally oriented businesses. So, and again, this is simply my opinion, and I am just one person. if there were a national cannabis store that would, want to pop up across from you, Anna, somewhere in the non-corridor part of Sunnyside, that may not be something that the future zoning bylaw will allow. But if somebody on, small street somewhere wants to have a cannabis store that specializes in local maple syrup infused cannabis, and that, is a local business that attracts a local population, then perhaps that might be allowed. So at this point, we don't know because the general permissions are there. And I think that the issue is that the general permissions may be too general. Next, is also convinced that the 400K estimate of population increases is valid. I don't know. I don't know enough about growth management to be able to say that. All we can do is go on the past, and the city has tended to overestimate some of its population projections, but not by that much. And considering that patterns are changing in the world, and I don't know what the political situation in other parts of the world is going to be over the next 25 years that might encourage more people to move to Ottawa, or what the business climate is going to be or anything like that. So we have to work with what the city says. If they're saying, 400K, 400K it is. But I think that there are ways to increase the densities in Old Ottawa South as needed to accommodate some of that growth, because some of that growth will pertain to our neighborhood. But there are also many, many, many neighborhoods in Ottawa, and I'm sure that we could do it well if we distribute that growth equitably amongst neighborhoods, and particularly in neighborhoods that are not yet 15-minute neighborhoods. So some of those neighborhoods could probably be densified to a greater degree and come closer to the great neighborhood that Old Ottawa South is, if policies worked harder at making all communities 15-minute neighborhood communities, rather than greatly evolving the communities that already are 15-minute neighborhoods and already work so well. Let's see, next. On 3 occasions, I have suggested that the forestry department be tasked up with coming up with community tree cover targets. Well, let's hope. And let's hope that there can be some policy that, if you have a tree on your property and you're developing your property, you should have every right to go to forestry and ask to have a tree removed. If you're asking for exceptions in order to build something bigger on your property, and there is a legitimate mature tree that exists on that area where you're asking for an exception, not for the area where you're legitimately allowed to build out as of right, well then perhaps forestry should take a look at that tree first, and the tree could come first. But again, that's just my own personal opinion. I don't think that's anything that would ever happen. But if we keep asking, maybe we can get some consideration for keeping the mature trees in our community. And then could we have more pocket parks to equalize the tree canopy in a neighborhood? Yes, that would be wonderful. And I think that the city does suggest that for the downtown and inner urban transects, all cash in lieu of parkland should be used to buy areas for parks and communities. Now that in and of itself is a wonderful policy, and I think something that's perfect. The problem is that within the parks management plan, it looks like there may be something there that says for low-rise infill that doesn't have site plan control attached to it, no cash in lieu will be taken. So if most of the development is going to be low-rise infill, and the city says that they will either reduce or exempt them from site plan control, that means there will be no cash in lieu, which means that there will be no money for buying the parkland. So again, that's another question, and I know that Sean and his team are looking at that as well. And so we're getting help on that, and they've been very helpful, and that's wonderful. And by the way, I'm answering some of these questions, but I know that Sean sent the Zoom link for this meeting to staff. So if there is anyone on this call from staff and you'd like to help answer some of these questions, please let us know. Let's see. Can you submit questions in advance of the open house? Yes, you can submit questions in advance of the city's open house. Go to engageottawa.ca and we can go from there. Your minor corridors Sunnyside, like our minor corridors in Overbrook, are not illustrated on a map with 150 meters, more like 30 meters. The text says up to 100. So we suggest the OP be clear that minor corridors are up to 30, not consistent, not 150 with the maps they have provided. Thank you, Heather. From Overbrook, I think that's wonderful. I am taking them at their word on the map, but it's probably worth it to mention it in our letter. So thank you very much for that. Elizabeth McAllister, hi Elizabeth. RE the open house, the city will select the questions. You're only allowed one question. They do not allow public chat, so they cannot be contested or questioned by informed people for the less informed to see others' opinions. They do not explain the implications, as Laura has done. Thank you, Elizabeth. I guess we have to take what we get with the city open house and reflect any deficiencies that we see with their processes and formats and with the body of the official plan in our letters. Also, there are delegations. People are allowed to speak at planning committee. The planning committee meeting begins on October 14th, and anyone wishing to speak at planning committee has 5 minutes. You will have to limit your comments to the official plan itself. They're not there to discuss the zoning bylaw or, you know, the fact that your neighbor paved over their driveway or whatever. But if any delegation wishes to speak on the official plan, they sign up with Melanie Dufresne at Planning Committee, and I think her email is on the presentation here. And you will have 5 minutes to speak. They cut you off after 5 minutes. So, you know, do your homework, be prepared if you wish to present something to Planning ERIC Committee on the 14th. And next, I'm having a hard time defining what is different about the evolving overlay versus the more inner blocks, as both seem to have a free-for-all. Within the evolving overlay, the city wishes to support applications that go beyond the zoning bylaw. That's not the case in neighborhood streets. So whatever the zoning bylaw is, you know, they will always have the one-offs where somebody gets a permission to do something. But in the evolving overlay, they explicitly say that they will go above and beyond whatever the zoning bylaw says. And importantly, not just what the zoning bylaw says today, tomorrow, or 3 years from now, but because the plan lasts for 25 years, they're willing to support applications that go beyond the zoning bylaw for the life, the 25-year life of the plan, and that's the difference. Also, while there are some non-residential uses that will be allowed, small commercial uses that will be allowed on ground floors of neighborhood streets, in the evolving overlay, it says that they may support non-residential uses, which means entire buildings. So you could have an office building, as long as it's 4 stories or less, within a few of the lots in an evolving overlay. Next, please share your presentation with emails and resource links. So we have shared the presentation. It's on the OSCA website, and on each page that we have, and I have Susan Brousseau to thank. She's a member of our committee, and she has done a wonderful job with this presentation. So big shout out to Susan. So where I have evolving overlay, I've written at the top section 5.6.1.1, so you know where to look for the information that's there. On the building heights, I guess you'd have to look at, you know, where they have main streets and so on. So within the next week or so, I'll look at putting something on the website beyond this presentation that gives the policy numbers for some of the major points here. Next, from Will. RE Colonel By, since about 35% of that is new build form, does that mean that new applications can cite being compatible with that street? Unfortunately, Will, yes. That is exactly what that means. But I think that the reason the city is looking at this is that they've seen so many of these applications come in that perhaps don't fit in quite as well with what was there previously. And we do have a heritage overlay now, and the city will be looking at additional protections. And so, that's what we can hope for. Nothing is ever set in stone. It's impossible that nothing is ever going to change. Things can and should change over time. But if change is compatible with what's existing, not only does it become more acceptable to the community that lives there, but in areas that have special character, such as the ribbon on both sides of the Rideau Canal, particularly between Bank and Bronson bridges. The rhythm and the cadence and what makes it special, the houses set within their landscape and in old English landscape style, we can work with that. And as things evolve and change, they can do so in a way that speaks to what's there, as opposed to something that you might find on any old street in Ottawa, in the suburbs or whatever. Next, rooming houses and group homes need proper management. There are regulations for that, Elizabeth. I think the city passed some regulations for when the short-term rentals were done. I believe there was something else done in that same period that had to do with rooming houses and licensing owners for rooming houses. I'm not 100% sure what those are, but they are there. Let's see, are there to be regulations to ensure rooming houses are well managed? Will there be oversight required of owners? Many are absentee now. So I do know that there is a new registration process, I believe, for owners of rooming houses, but don't quote me on that, and we should all look into that. Are the Colonel By restrictions apply only to the houses further, whoops, cancel, further back?
Laura, I can just jump in on the rooming houses piece.
Thank you.
Just to fill in, so that we did pass a new bylaw for short-term rentals. Some of those would apply to rooming houses as well, but it is under appeal right now. So it's quite a strong bylaw. You cannot have a separate unit that is meant for short-term rental, so Airbnbs, if you do not live in the residence. So that's the way that some other cities have done it now, and that's been successful there. And there must be a registration system as well. That bylaw is currently under appeal with the Ontario Land Tribunal, and so we are waiting a decision there until we can formalize the bylaw. So that's still yet to come, but it should be coming into force once that appeal is done. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Thanks for helping out on that. And again, if anybody is here from the city who wants to address any of these issues and help us out, that would be wonderful. Let's see, where are we at? Let's see. So yes, the Colonel By study will be for properties that face the canal. So from Abby Hoffman, driving at is whether the city we might generally agree on a few critical concerns that we should all raise. I don't know that we can do that, Abby, because everyone's an individual and one person's concerns may be another person's concerns, not be another person's concerns. In terms of my own personal concerns, if you want some of those, site plan control, the lack of site plan control is, I think, would be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing for development. You know, if it affects cash in lieu and we don't get the parks, but we get the infill, well, that in and of itself is a reason for imposing site plan control on absolutely everything. You know, not having a control over garbage, not holding money back, the holdback that ensures that garbage is where it's supposed to be, that, you know, there's room for trees, that accessibility concerns are met, that drainage concerns are met, not having site plan control for the majority of the proposed infill, which is low rise infill, I think would be very detrimental. The depth of the evolving overlay, I think that that's something we need to address. And I know that Sean and his team are working on that as well as on site plan control. I don't think that you can take every main street in the city and treat it the same. Bank and Walkley is not the same as Bank and Sunnyside. So while an evolving overlay of 150 meter depth might, and I don't know that it is, but might be something that is appropriate at Bank and Walkley, it may be much less appropriate at Bank and Sunnyside or Bank and Hopewell. And I think that perhaps up until this new plan, in the older neighborhoods, these were called traditional main streets. When you got out to Bank and Walkley, they were called arterial main streets. And there were different rules for traditional main streets versus arterial main streets. That's all being eliminated in this plan. A main street is a main street is a main street. But I disagree in that I don't think that the area behind, say, you know, Bank and Hopewell, Bank and Aylmer, Bank and Sunnyside is the same as Bank and Walkley, and I don't believe it should be treated the same. So I think that the evolving overlays, while I acknowledge that they are needed if we are to attain the numbers that we need and the type of increased density that we need in terms of, say, larger apartments, some sort of transition between a main street and the inner neighborhood has to occur. I don't believe that the 150 meter depth is something that would be appropriate in old neighborhoods such as Old Ottawa South, Old Ottawa East, the Glebe, you know, Centertown, all of those areas. I'm sure, you know, Manor Park, Overbrook, all of those areas that are older and have established neighborhoods. The 150 meter depth is too much because it reduces us to basically postage stamps areas that are then the neighborhood designations. So I think that consideration needs to be given to the depth of the overlays in what are up to now called traditional Main Street versus what's called arterial Main Streets. So those two topics are something that I think will have the greatest impact in our neighborhood. Obviously, you know, the tree canopy, but there are a lot of people who are going to be beating on that drum. So, you know, that's important, but there are a lot of people who are already speaking to that, which is great. You know, yeah, the other things are all important, but, you know, in terms of speaking to the 15-minute neighborhood, we already are a 15-minute neighborhood, you know, so I don't think we have to fight on that too much, other than mentioning that perhaps neighborhoods that aren't 15-minute neighborhoods, the focus should be on turning them into wonderful neighborhoods such as ours, rather than, you know, killing the golden goose. So those are my basic concerns. I invite everybody else to chime in and say, you know, what theirs are. And if there is any agreement with the main ones that I've mentioned, please write in on those. And there's a presentation here that has many, many impacts, so you can choose which ones speak to you. Let's see. Do Heather Amos has brought up the discrepancy with the maps. Yeah, hopefully we'll all mention it and we'll see where it goes. I accepted the maps. but you know, that may not be, we should probably mention that it's not said anywhere in the actual pages, the depth of the corridor in the minor corridors being limited. So Abby Hoffman, does anyone think 150 meters in OOS is a good idea? No one has responded. So anyway, if anybody else has any questions or any other comments, raise hand, speak up, and we can go from there. All good? Okay, I don't think I see any additional comments. So great. Oh, one more. Oh, thank you so much. Great. So this might be the point to introduce Carol. Could you introduce Richard? He has a few words for us to end this meeting. Thank you so much. Before I go, thank you again to everyone. Thank you to Sean and his team for all the work that they are doing with us. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Luke, for taking this time out of your evening and working on this with us. I'm very, very grateful, and I'm sure that everyone who has attended this is as well. Thank you to Matt and to Winnie. And Susan, thank you for all your work on this presentation. And to all of you who have attended and listened, please get the word out. Please speak with your neighbors. Please write in. You know, we were very fortunate. Our letters did have an impact. The transforming overlay is a thing of the past and one less thing to worry about. Let's keep going with what we're doing, and let's keep it up when the zoning begins. Thank you. Carol?
Thank you, Laura. I think you've said the thank yous to just about everybody on the team.
Except you, Carol. Thank you.
Yeah. It's definitely been a joint effort. It's been Laura has attended many meetings. I think she's actually quite thankful that a lot of them are Zoom meetings. Although we are all a bit tired of Zoom, it doesn't mean you don't have to leave the house as often as you used to. So we thank you for your efforts, because you do sit on many committees and bring back a lot of important information from the other community associations and the collective angst that many of us feel about the speed of that the official plan is being pushed through and the impact that it will have on our neighborhood. So I'd like to turn this over to Richard Siskowski, who is our the president of OSCA, to say a few closing comments. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Carol. I've been listening for the last hour and a half, and it's always amazing to see the quality of the work that's done by the Planning and Zoning Committee. Laura, Carol, you and your group really need a pat on the back. This is so vital for not only our community, but for communities across the city, what you're doing here. And as the president of OSCA, it's just get really quite proud to see the kind of work that you're able to do. So thanks again. What I took away from this meeting was really, I think, 3 ideas. The one, obviously, it's about the overlay. The evolving overlay just seems to be an issue that is problematic. And the way you articulated it later in your presentation, the distinction between the designation of a traditional main street and an arterial street really does seem to me to put the spotlight on what's going on, because it is different to be in Bank Street at, say, Sunnyside or Hopewell, and Bank Street at Walkley Road. So I think stuff has to get done there. The other thing that really hit me was the site plan control stuff. And, you know, man, if we throw that away from the city, we're just in a lot of trouble. There's just no doubt in my mind. The tree canopy stuff, it's amazing to me that it's so obvious that people want to have trees in their neighborhoods and that there ought to be targets for every neighborhood, but the city seems to be reluctant. The city seems to want to only have the tree canopy target for the full city. So I know what I'm going to be writing about, and I'm going to encourage everybody who's on this call to write in by October the 13th. You know, the presentation is going to be up at OSCA, so you'll have access to all of that information. But write in and tell the planning committee and tell the councillors what you think about, because it's going to impact on us and our kids forever. So in closing, I too would like to say thank you again to everybody for showing up and paying attention to this really important issue. Other than that, I have nothing to say other than I hope everybody has a good night. Carol or Laura, you're going to wrap it up? Laura?
Laura would just wants to wave. She's been talking for the last hour and a half.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you everybody for coming. And as Richard mentioned, please write letters in and talk to your neighbors and encourage them to pay attention to the issue that is at hand. We only have a very short window to make our voices heard. It would be great if this was not cast in stone in October, but many things will be, and that cannot be changed for years to come. And that is actually, for me, that is the scary thought, that we cannot change some of the things. And if council gets it wrong now, it's going to be wrong for a long time. So let's make our voices heard, and good night to everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Carol, and please thank Simon again. That was very kind of him.
Yeah. And the September 30th is the Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So our thoughts and remembrance and reflection on the issues around Indigenous identity and the issues that the whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission talked about are top of mind for me and my family on that day. So as I'm wearing my
Carol. Well said.
orange shirt day. So, okay, take care.
Take care. Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. There you go.